Hey everyone, we're still waiting for a couple of more minutes for everyone to join, but we will start in a couple of minutes. So very excited about that. We have Kevin already on as well, and so talk to you soon. It's on. Hello everyone. So we are ready to start with our webinar. We have quite a lot of attendees today, so thank you so much for everyone for signing up, and thank you, Kevin, from Microsoft, for taking the time to speak with us and knowledge about like how testing is being done at Microsoft. And first off, maybe I would like to give an introduction about myself. So I'm Kristel, and I am one of the founders of Testlio. And Testlio is connecting enterprises with a global community of software testers. To provide really amazing customer experiences. And today we're really here to talk about engineering and quality with our industry veteran, Kevin Henrikson. And Kevin is an awesome guy. He has been founding companies. He has been leading multiple software development teams in very, very big companies. And recently, he founded a company called Accompli that was acquired by Microsoft 2.5 years ago. And now he's a partner director of engineering at Microsoft. So Kevin, thank you so much for coming today, and we're super happy to have you here. You can tell everyone hi as well.
You bet. Hi, thanks for inviting me. This is going to be great. I'm really excited, looking forward to all these challenging questions, see if you can stump me. So I'm ready to go.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I'm ready to go as well. I just throw like myself on the board as well, so I have someone watching my back as well.
Nice.
But yeah, just to maybe I can give a quick agenda on today as well. So we have like a 35 minutes fire chat discussion with Kevin, but I am really encouraging everyone to ask questions during our conversations. So we are actually streaming all of the questions as well, and if there are some interesting ones coming up, then we will ask them immediately. So don't hold yourself back. We're gonna try answering as many questions as possible. And then second thing is we might have a couple of polls coming up on your screen a couple of times during the conversations. So feel free to answer that as well, so we can get some more points to talk about. But so let's start. So Kevin, Can you talk a little bit about yourself and what you've done in the past, and yeah, let's start from there.
Sure. So I don't know how far you want me to go back, but I grew up on a pig farm in Central California. So I had lots of motivation to go to college and learn something else. So I didn't end up being a pig farmer forever. I totally loved growing up on the farm, but it was great to go to school and learn a little bit about. I actually was a mechanical engineering major, so but coming out of school when the internet was kind of blowing up, made it more sense to do software. And so I've been working at various software companies you talked about for a while, mostly focused on the email space, and so email and calendaring type applications for various types of uses, some for larger carriers, and now more recently for enterprise and consumers, and then with Acompli, really focused on the mobile aspects of that. And so today I manage the engineering teams at Microsoft that are focused on Outlook for the mobile client and also the Mac client, so iOS, Android, and Mac, which is great. So we've been able to make a lot of changes and really try to bring Outlook to a bunch of new devices where Microsoft traditionally didn't have a lot of strength, but over the last couple of years has really grown significantly.
And so how did you end up in this position today at Outlook team? So I mentioned before you were founding a company called Acompli, so maybe you can talk a little bit about that story and go from there.
Yeah, so about let's see, 4.5 years ago now, we started a company called Acompli, with the idea that we felt mobile email and mobile productivity was broken. And so we picked email as kind of the base case and ended up expanding into calendar and contacts and as a mobile expression of how you get things done, right? More and more today, people are, with their phone, all day long. And so how can you use the context in the phone to help you not send longer emails and that, but just send better emails, right? So how can you be more productive on your phone? And then Microsoft showed an interest in the company about 1.5 years after we started it, ended up acquiring the company, and as part of that acquisition, we renamed Acompli to Outlook and then launched it about 6 or 8 weeks after the acquisition, and today has been Outlook, and so today we have tens of millions of users using Outlook on their phones, and that kind of grew into what I have today, and then as part of that, some reorgs, as big companies do, picked up the leadership of the Mac team, and so it's been great to kind of take some of the things that we've learned building Acompli and share that with the Mac team, but a team that's been around a long time at Microsoft and as part of Office, and Outlook is kind of the core to Office, is a big part of how Microsoft sees the future in terms of like the users spend an enormous amount of their day in Outlook, varieties of different platforms, whether it's on the web or Outlook on their Windows machine or Outlook on their Mac or on their phone. And so being part of that's been pretty cool in the last couple of years, as you said, that I've been at Microsoft.
Yeah, that's super exciting, and I just wanted to know to everyone, send a note to everyone, or say to everyone as well that we even have signs up in our office at Testlio, like what would Kevin do, because we've followed Kevin's journey for such a long time, and the way he approaches things and how fast he is able to release stuff and in high quality has been so impressive. And so we have like huge posters up about Kevin. So so we're super excited to have you, and it's really, really good. But now, but talking about let's dig a bit more deeper into Outlook's mobile development cycles. So how's your team structured? Like what are the roles, and how big is your team?
So the total team's around 100 today, and that's grown. I mean, when we were a company and we were acquired, we were on 19 people. So we had like basically 1 or 2 people working on each of the mobile apps for iOS and Android, a couple people working on the service component that runs in the cloud, a couple people in ops, a couple people doing marketing and sales. But today that team's grown significantly. Today we have more than 10 people working on each of the clients on iOS and Android. There's more than 20 people working on the Mac client. And then again, 5 to 6 people in the operations side, and then around 10 or so people in the server side, and then each of those teams are a little bigger than that, but roughly adds up to around 100. And the part that so that the team's grown significantly, I think, since we were acquired, right? But the core of the way we do things, I think, is still the same structurally, right? We've had to scale some of the processes and change some of the approaches. Obviously, you can't have a stand-up with 100 people in there and everybody take 30 seconds to say what they're doing. So you kind of move to more of a scrum to scrum type model where teams meet each in their own groups, and then we kind of roll that up to a larger kind of team meeting.
Very cool. So yeah, you have like a bigger team now, and so what are your team's like biggest priorities, and where does testing fit in?
Yeah, so I think at the high level, you say you want to build an app that users love, right? And so if you look at the traditional way that IT deployed software, Outlook was really built for the IT manager, the IT admin. If you think about it, it was a way for them to control and provide security around the email traffic or the communication of their users. And clearly today, people don't think of email as like something that IT, enforces. They think of it as a way that they communicate and get work done. And so our view at Acompli, and as we translated that into Outlook, was that the first and foremost, our job is to build something that users love, and to build a culture of a team that people like working on the team, right? And so a lot of the processes that we have around agility and around the way we test and release software is really to create a great environment to be an engineer, because we feel that like if we have an incredible team with a good culture, they're going to in turn build great product, which will then allow the users to love it, and then be able to have a virtuous cycle, and then that growth and kind of ends up being something that Microsoft can monetize, or we as a team can monetize around offices, because people love the software. And so this notion of kind of inverting the model from, hey, building something that IT asked you to build, or a company comes to you and say, hey, here's all the features I need, which is kind of a traditional way of enterprise software being built, and moving it to a model and saying, how do we be incredibly in tune with what our users want, and understanding and listening to them. But at the scale we're at today, that becomes very hard. So that is part of the reason the team's grown, is that with tens of millions of users, that's lots of people to listen to, and the opportunity to really impact them is great, but it comes with incredible responsibility to make sure that you deliver high quality, because one little bug and you're saying, oh, that in fact is 0.5% or 1% of users. Well, 1% of tens of millions is millions of users. And so today, that's probably one of the biggest things we focus on, is how do we really maintain quality and be able to continue to have an agility inside of the engineering process that we can release quickly, and so that we can get features out, and that the amount of kind of waiting code or code that has been written but not released is very small, because that's something that from a developer productivity or developer happiness, developers are not happy writing code that just sits on their laptop or sits in some code repo, right? They really want to get that out to users, and the quicker we can do that, the better the engineering teams feel. But as part of that, obviously, there's an incredible responsibility to make sure we do that with high quality, which is very challenging.
Yeah, I really love that, and I totally believe in your vision as well. And do you think that something has changed over time now that you're being in Outlook and before being at Acompli? Like, has there anything changed, or like, do you see a cultural change as well between these two companies?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, the Microsoft has an enormous amount of resources, right, to go and get things done. So it's very easy to go and get certain things done at Microsoft, right? Where it's like, hey, I need to run a big marketing campaign, or I want to run, I need large investment. We started a team in China, for example. We already had a team in India and New York and San Francisco and Mountain View and Seattle. So we have a relatively distributed team, which is cool. And we, again, it's part of the culture, right? That we can work where we want to live and really hire the best people from anywhere in the world. And so Microsoft helps enable that to happen, right? Is being able to give us the ability to say, hey, we want to spin up a team in this location, we can do that. But I think, similarly, some of the things that traditionally happen, if you think back, a decade ago, Microsoft was releasing software every 3 years, right? So they would work for 3 years, release a new Office version, and then again go dark for essentially 3 years and work on the next one. And Windows to some extent had some of those changes, and now with Windows 10, we're releasing, every week with Patch Tuesday, but then like there's also like kind of monthly releases, and the apps are moving to a much faster paradigm, and Windows is shipping twice a year, and it's kind of this continual upgrade. And so as the service around the core platform has changed, we've even pushed that to another limit inside of the Mac and mobile teams, where we're releasing every week, right? And so being able to move that quickly is something that was initially a challenge inside of a company that was not used to shipping that quickly. And so lots of processes that they thought were fast. They're like, hey, this used to take a month in the 3-year build cycle. And they're like, well, great, we've got it down to a week so we can ship every month. And we're like, no, we want to ship every week. So you need to do it in like an hour or a day. And in some cases, seconds. And so a lot of the things we've done as we've come into Microsoft is figured out how we can automate and remove a lot of these flexibilities. So I think, to Tesla's credit, right, like a lot of the testing that we do, even at Acompli, is having a very rapid scale release process. So we work, Monday through Friday writing code, but then every Friday we ship basically to QA or to get device certification over the weekend. And so even in the weekend, we still are, kind of working in a sense that we're validating and checking off that build. And so come Monday morning, we can address any critical issues and then start the release process and then again start the sprint again. So that kind of 7-day cycle and basically being able to work every day has been, one of the keys to our success at Acompli, being able to be incredibly agile and decide, quickly about what we wanted to build and how we wanted to add features. But now inside of Microsoft, that's also a similar strength of the team. Even as we scale, we've been able to maintain that incredibly rapid sprint cycle, and it's kind of like the trains always run on time, and that's important to us and it's important to the team. But it also, at some level, you're like, hey, that seems stressful. You're moving so quickly and never taking a break. But it's also incredibly relieving in the sense that if something's not done and something's not perfect on Friday, there's no pressure to make this ship train, because the worst, if you're like, hey, it's only going to miss by a day, that's fine. Just take your time and do it right, so that way it can ship in the following week, and so that you're only going to have to wait 4 or 5 days, and the next train will be going. And so that's something that we've been kind of blessed with, to keep that model. And you change the traditional model from saying, hey, we make a mistake, we need to roll back. Like, we just roll forward, right? For us, it's the ability to fix and correct something. It's much easier to just make the next build better than it is to try to find a way to, go completely have to roll back or undo something you did.
Yeah. So we're talking a lot about like scale and speed and trying to release everything very fast and in high quality, but always something suffers. Like, what are in your opinion some of the key challenges of doing QA in such an environment?
Yeah, so QA is interesting, right? Because just before we were acquired, Microsoft actually removed QA as a discipline. So Microsoft moved to a model where they called it combined engineering, where there's a single engineering team that includes development and quality, but there's the role of tester just doesn't exist. We don't have a testing role. And so the idea of that was similar to like DevOps, in the sense that we no longer have a separate ops team. Like, the engineering team, the ops team is part of the engineering team, and they're responsible for writing code to automate their work. The quality is sort of the same way. And so we build, an incredible amount of automation around the low-level functionalities in the cloud. But for some of the device testing, the diversity of devices and the diversity of the content in an email and calendaring app, it's nearly impossible to build all of those matrices and the amount of different possibilities. And so early on, we've been working with Testlio to help us kind of manage that in a 2 ways, right? So one, we don't get to pick our users. People can come to the App Store, and anybody from anywhere in the world, like we've been worldwide since the day we released, in I think 63 languages, we have the app translated now, can download that app and try it and use it, right? And so we don't get to choose that user. We don't get a chance to meet them in Best Buy when they bought their computer, like in a traditional way, or like help them install Office and set it up. Like, it's on their phone and they get to go for it and use it. And we have, a sheer number of seconds to impress them and show them that they know how to use the app. It has to be intuitive. They have to open it because it's, a long press and slide it up, and you've deleted the app and it's gone, right? And so like, your chance of like losing or, basically failing on the promises that you made is incredibly short. And so the benefit of having, there's no way our team could own all the devices. There's no way we could pick every use case. And so the way that, as we work with Testlio is that every week on Friday we release that build, and then Testlio sort of rotates through a variety of testers to give us both diversity in the users, different languages, different locations, different types of, cellular, corporate, Wi-Fi, different devices. And so, the general kind of test cadence is that we don't, tell Testlio, hey, please give us this exact test matrix. We essentially let it be random and what comes in. And certain days we'll say, hey, we need more focus on this particular Android release, or we need more focus on this particular device. or hey, let's do more tablet testing this week because we had a bunch of changes in tablet, for the larger size. But the general kind of cadence of the way we run, we purposely don't want to know who's going to test, because it's just like our users. When we push the button to release on the App Store or the Play Store, like, we no longer get a choice in terms of what devices they have. If it's compatible, if they have the right OS version, it's going to go and they're going to use it. And so we need to have a kind of a device validation or testing kind of framework that matches with that. And so for us, where Microsoft as a company's kind of went to a combined engineering phase, there's still an importance in this notion of diversity testing and device testing, because we don't have, for example, we do have 5 engineering offices that are pretty well distributed, but there's obviously, of the 63 languages we support, we probably only have, 8 or 10 native language speakers on our team. And so, we still need the other 50 covered, and to be able to work through that. And again, we probably have 20 some devices across the people, because generally the team has more newer devices and more updated devices. And again, we want to be able to test on, a wider selection of devices that's around in the world. So it's been a good partnership.
Awesome. So we actually, I wanted to mention that we're putting up a poll on this as well, because we're really trying to understand, like, what are the key challenges for companies doing QA. But we also have a question from the audience, actually quite many, but I'm going to start with the first one. So yeah, you talked a lot about, like, the 2 years ago Microsoft introduced, like, the combined engineering into Microsoft, and now my question, or the question from the audience comes, how does Microsoft value manual testing? Because I think a lot of people felt that like, manual QA is being replaced by engineers only.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. So I think that there's still some value in manually validating things that just are hard to automate. I mean, if you look back 10 to 15 years, maybe even a little less than that, 6 to 8 years, we were building mostly SaaS apps and traditionally web apps. There wasn't as large of a focus on mobile. And some of the testing frameworks were relatively primitive in that sense, and that, for a very simple application, it was relatively straightforward to, like, walk through and log in and do something on a web browser and automate it. But for the incredibly complex app, or something like an email application where there's lots of diversity in data, and as well as the UI, and something that's iterating that quickly where the changes are, it's very hard for the automation to keep up. And so at the company before Comply was a company called Zimbra, and we had about 40,000 test cases that we would run, and it would take about 3 to 4 days to run those across a huge cluster of VMs. And the team was probably about 35 people in QA that worked on that automation. And I always kind of, today look back and say that was an incredibly negative ROI thing, because most of the time the team was fixing the tests and rebuilding them, because it was just so fragile from a UI and UX point of view. And so I think for a lot of these cases, especially things that are end user facing, we've much moved to, like, the team dog foods and kind of manual tests by using the application all the time. Like, every check-in from our builds goes to all of the dev team. And so in a sense, everybody in the dev team, everybody in the product team, the entire company, every week gets a rollout of our build. So once a week, we update the entire company's app, but every check-in, we update the dev team. So, the 40, 50 folks on the dev team, they're literally manual testing every build, right? And so if it's something like reply or forward, or, like, something that when you rotate the device, like, those issues, they're caught very quickly, because people are using the app. And so, so I think we value menu testing, but we don't think of it as, like, an independent discipline where there's one person that just sits there and runs the buttons and clicks the test. Like, we think of that as a distributed job on the team. And so that gives us coverage on the primary devices and the kind of the more popular newer devices. But again, we leverage Testlio to give us coverage on some of the older devices, but also coverage in other languages and things we could have missed during that week. And then, in terms of rollout, we use flighted rollouts, and so we roll out things gradually, right? Small, the App Store, you have to, the iOS App Store, you have to basically push everything at once, and so the flights are features inside of the app. But in the Play Store for Google, it's great. We can turn on, like, 1%, 2%, and kind of roll that out in a very controlled fashion and look for crashes and watch telemetry. So there's still a place for manual testing. We've kind of integrated into the development process. Like I said, the device piece, Testlio partners and helps us with, but the role of it is still there. I think I've seen some new startups that are incredibly interesting that are using either machine learning or computer vision to try to actually generate automated testing without having to write code. And so I think some of the advancements that are going to come, just like today, very complex web applications can be automated and testing based on user data, right? And so I think some of the more interesting stuff is how do you capture the use case of how users use your data in the wild through telemetry and app recording, and then play that back into automated testing, rather than kind of the traditional way of doing automation where you have like an Excel spreadsheet with a list of tasks and a list of things. And like, I think that model is going to, you know, decrease over time. I think that more and more teams are going to move to, you know, putting, you know, automation in places where there's good ROI, where you can write tests and the APIs and the functionality that you're testing is very stable. So unit tests and integration tests, but to get comprehensive UI look and polish and feel, that those kind of things will end up being manual at some level, and really use telemetry to kind of listen to that. So like we have a couple things in the app, like if our app ever hangs for more than 15 seconds on the UI thread, we actually crash the app. And so then we, you know, it's like a hard assert that forces that bug to go get fixed, but it also, you know, enables us to kill our app before the OS does, because like Apple, you know, if your app hangs for that long, Apple will just quit the app and say, hey, something's wrong. And then you don't get that feedback. And so by us forcefully quitting that app as an example, we collect it. We also set in telemetry alerts much earlier than that, so 3 and 5 seconds if we see a UI hang. And so those kind of things give us a lot more leverage for the manual testing, because a lot of times if you're a user and you're manual testing something, you're like, oh, that hung for 3 seconds. Like, you may not report that as a bug because like you can't really reproduce it, but you may see it and it's annoying. And so what we do today is we use data to collect that, and then we can machine learn and run regressions off that and say, hey, for every time somebody opened a message, the average time was 300 milliseconds, but in a certain case, if the message is over this size, hey, it was popping and it's 4 seconds. Oh, there's something wrong with the HTML render, and we can dig in. But we have the data to go dig into that. So the manual testing, or the manual use, I guess I say, becomes kind of our test data. And so a lot of the quality work, while not dedicated in kind of traditional manual testing engineers, the quality work's done as a team, again, in this combined engineering fashion with as much automation and telemetry that we can to kind of report back on what we learned.
Very cool. So now, also, I think my next question would come from the same thing is, so you're mentioning that you gather a lot of data about your users, and so, but like, will data help you make the decision as well, like how you prioritize your issues, and how do you decide on which issues are you going to fix on each release, because your release schedule is still very fast, right? And like, how do you make that decision on prioritizing your issues, and yeah, that would be
that's great. So I think, you know, all software has bugs, right? And I think that's just the nature, and it's a great job security for both of us, I think, at some level, but it's an important piece of the puzzle, right? I think the way that we use the data is two-factor, right? Like, as you know from Testlio, we only allow them to give us 3 bugs, right? And so we say, what are the, you know, this app is in production, it has millions of users, we know it's working, but we also know there's issues and things we can improve. And so to focus that attention on what are the top 3 issues, we only basically allow, like, what are the 3 best, most impactful issues, and that, you know, all the issues are recorded, but in our report each week, we only get highlighted the top 3 to go look at. Similarly, we use Hockey App, which is another acquisition that Microsoft made, and, you know, super popular data tool for crash analytics. And they give us an incredible amount of data, not only on crash frequency and histograms and like when did this first release in which build, but also the number of impacted users. Because traditionally you would just look at the crash count and say, oh, this is the top crash. But in many cases, that top crash is a small number of devices that are crashing in continuous loop, or, you know, in Android's case, like, there are people that have modified or done something to their phone that's triggering this crashes, and it's not, you know, you may see 1 or 2 users that have like got into this bad state. But so that looks like the most important issue or crash to go fix, yet, you know, maybe number 7 on the list is more important because it's impacting, you know, thousands of users versus, you know, but it's only crashing maybe once or twice, whereas something that's, you know, impacting 1 or 2 users but crashing, you know, tens of thousands of times a day because somebody's kind of done something weird with their device is a less impactful thing. And so we use data to both decide the priority and really try to mimic and focus on the most important things, because, you know, we want to get it done in a week and improve the product and keep moving forward. And then also, what's the impact to the user base? And so really having deep telemetry in terms of like, is that something our users do commonly, right? So there may be some low level feature and settings that's maybe, if you do some crazy combination of things, that the app will do a bad thing or it will crash. But that's just not a frequent use case, right? Whereas something that happens like in the message list or in reply or in calendar, like those are incredibly heavily used services. And so even a small imperfection or a small hang is disastrous to our users and the intent. And so, if we look for any kind of slowing scrolling speed, if you don't have like that, video game type, 50, 60 frames per second scrolling, and that really, really sharp looking feel, like that's why we report telemetry very accurately on when we see the frame rate drop. We know something's wrong. We're not reusing cells. We're, having memory bloat or there's some issue. We take that data and go back and say that is a hard problem we need to go solve potentially because it impacts so many users and it's such a critical kind of home screen or front screen to the folks that are using our app every day, or and our heaviest users are using the app upwards of 100 times a day, right? Launching it, going in there. Average session length is like 23, 24 seconds. And so if you think about somebody coming in and basically being inside your app for 23 to 24 seconds, our job is to make sure that they can get the most done inside of that small window, right? And so our job is how many taps, how many things can they get done? I'm kind of this crazy inbox zero person, right? And so I'm always like swiping and, going there and triage as quick as I can, find the two important ones. We have this thing called Focus Inbox, which allows us to, kind of push down messages that are more for mail lists or, senders you haven't seen, and really prioritize based on people you send to frequently. So if you send me a mail and we have lots of communication, your mail is going to bubble up versus somebody who I may be, a cold intro or somebody that I haven't emailed in a long time. They're going to have a lower weight. And so all of those kind of features and functionality are built into the app, but really are designed to be how efficient can you be when you're in the application, because today's mobile apps, the session length is incredibly small. And so we want to have people, have a great experience for the few seconds that they're going to be in our app before they toggle off to whatever they're going to go do next.
Yeah, I agree. So we actually have the results from our first poll as well. The question was, what is the biggest pain point in testing? And first was with 30% was testing speed and reporting. So I think we can elaborate more on like how do you really get your cycles speed enough so you can satisfy your customers, and considering that Outlook Mobile is really releasing on weekly basis, like how do you continue with that pace and because there are so many different
so this data is great, right? I think if you look at this data today, right, like you say, okay, so testing and reporting speed, right? Well, how quickly can you get that feedback? Again, that and kind of reproducing uncommon bugs are sort of tied, right? And so being able to collect that data and have that data available, and so having good telemetry and kind of baseline telemetry, and then correlating that with your crashes, right? And so when we see, like I said, in the crashes case, we have hockey, and we're able to tie that back and say, for these people crashing, here's the stack trace, or here's the breadcrumbs of the type of things they were doing. Oh, they were on compose. Oh, they had just archived a message, or they had, just tried to multi-select three messages and move them. Whatever the case may be, you can go and identify that and find those issues. The speed thing is actually an interesting one, because if you think about it, like, hey, how did we design in a week? And, we tried different things. As a small startup, when we had 2 or 3 people, we were kind of releasing every day because the impact was low. And, if we made a mistake, it was just a small number of users that were impacted, and they were mostly our friends because it was early in testing. But as we started to get a little more rigorous, we said, hey, let's, 2 weeks is kind of what everybody, hey, most agile companies are 2 weeks, and that's, great. And so we tried that for a while. And what we found was that most of the work would get done on the Thursday before the second Friday, right? So basically, the day before the end of the sprint, like, you'd see this crazy spike in check-ins of everybody like piling in their work to finish the sprint. And we're saying, well, that's weird, because then you get all this, landing and integration issues, and you have a lot more crashes, and trying to shake out like a bunch of fresh code, and then you gotta kind of end the sprint in 24 hours. And so we said, well, what if we try a week? And sure enough, the same thing happened. So we try a week, and on the same thing, Thursday, you get a big spike. But it's great because that spike is half the size, because the amount of work we're signing up for is 1/2 of what we were doing. And so now we see, a little bit of check-ins early in the week of stuff that was in code review or kind of stuff. Those kind of dribble in, and then you see kind of a ramp and spike in Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday it dies off because people are like, hey, I don't want to press it. I don't want to be that, engineer that's stuck on Friday checking something in and I broke the build, or put in something that we got to revert for the next week. And so you sort of see that similar spike on Thursday, Friday morning, depending on which time zone you're checking in at. And that kind of felt like a good model. And then we hand off, like I said, at Friday evening time, we cut a staging build and we hand that to Testlio and then our internal teams to all try and basically use for the weekend. And then on Monday we were able to take that feedback and use it. And so two levels, right? One is that we're able to look at the data over a 2 or 3 day period, because from Friday till like Monday morning, and hey, was there any top crashers? And that's a separate build that we have hockey and telemetry on, that we can make sure that the numbers look good. We have your kind of Testlio's feedback around specific use cases that were either new or broke or bugs that that we had fixed, or things that we had thought. So we write very detailed release notes of what changed. We have a script today that just generates that from our source control system. So people check in, all the you must check in with a bug number and what you did, and so you have that makes it pretty easy to print out a list of new things that changed, things that we bug fixes, and then kind of developer notes. Hey, we updated this SDK, or we changed this OS, and so it kind of gives us a nice little chunk of a list for us ourselves to know what changed, but also to share with partners like yourself. And so Testlio goes and they know where to go look and say, oh look, they did a bunch of work and changed the network stack. Well, let's go and do network stack testing and put a bunch of randomization in the network stack to see what happens. And so I think at some level, our team gets to focus on adding telemetry and making sure that as we see problems, we're able to debug them quickly. So we built a ton of tooling around telemetry and diagnosing issues and being able to use in-app support, so we can, when you report an issue in the in the app, that generates the log files and the telemetry needed, and we get all that captured so that we can analyze that and look for that problem. And that not only helps us in kind of the validation and dev stages, but it is immensely popular and useful, I guess I should say, in the production environment, because now we have this huge scale. We can't talk to all the users. We have in-app support. We talk to 9,000 to 10,000 people a day, file support tickets, and we talk to them in a few minutes. But engineering can't look at 9,000 tickets, and so as we process those through our support team, they're very efficient, but they're able to bubble up the 1 to 2% of, hey, this is a really weird one, I don't think you've seen it, or hey, there's 5 or 6 people that are having this specific problem, or maybe there's hundreds of people. Engineering can go back and grab a snapshot of those. They already have the telemetry and data, and so that, again, lets us focus our resources on the most important piece, which is diagnosing those problems and solving them quickly, because we've spent the work up front to kind of engineer a great kind of debugger or pipeline for diagnosing issues.
Very cool. So I have a next question on, we have a couple of questions actually from the audience as well, but I'm going to dig a bit deeper into these a bit later on. But my next question was actually, when we're talking about speed and like hearing your customers' feedback, then how do you handle like big feature releases at Microsoft? For example, you introduced the Focus Inbox, or like do you engage with a beta user group as well, where you gather that data, or like do you do incremental releases? What's your take on that?
All of that, right? So we have multiple rings, right? So I think I talked about, we have like the dev ring, which is like people on the development team, which is 40, 50 people, including product people and kind of like just people that are very close to development. Like if you know the name of like 80% of the engineers, then you're kind of on our dev build, right? Like because you're going to be giving them feedback and that's great. And then if you move out to like what we call the kind of dog food or Microsoft ring, that is basically everybody at Microsoft, which is obviously we have 110,000 full-time people and another 120,000 contractors, so 250,000 people that have the ability to use one of our mobile apps. As you would imagine, most of them have a phone, and so they do. And so we're able to get that testing, and so that's a weekly kind of testing, and then running that ring, we're able to get internal feedback that's safer in the sense that they work for our company. And then the next ring, kind of in parallel with the dog food, is kind of an external beta. And so for Android, we're able to have that be public, and so it's public. You can go get our beta builds and test them weekly with us. If you're on iOS, it's a little different because of the way TestFlight works, and so we have to opt you into that. And so there's a waiting list for that for folks that want to test on that and be kind of early validation. And then as we roll those, and then we roll to production. And in production, in the case of a large feature like Focus Inbox, it's rolled out percentage at a time. And so we're able to kind of incrementally roll that out to a subset of the users, step by step, hour by hour, day by day, depending on the ramp that we want to pick. And then from that, again, watching key telemetry, right? Like, is the user session time changing? the way we expected it to? Are the number of sessions, the number of composed emails going down? So we watch some of the key KPIs to understand if those change in a good or bad way to decide whether we go to the next phase of the rollout. And we've now started to do some of the work that Microsoft has is these experimentation frameworks where we're able to almost automate the rollout. And so what we do is we basically set up an experiment and say, we're going to make a change where we're going to move this button or change the color of something, and that's an experiment. And we mark that as an experiment and say, hey, here's the case. It's like, you know, A, B, C, 3 different options, and it randomizes that across a small set of the user base. And then each of those, it's got a scoreboard tied to it. So we have a list of expectations. We expect, you know, these 5 KPIs to not change or not degrade. We expect these 2 to get better or not be harmed. And then this one we expect to go down, you know, as an example. And then as that experiment automatically rolls out, it looks at those KPIs, and at each step of the way, it'll say 1%, 2%, 6%, 12%, you know, kind of rolls out in an incremental, increasingly phase. And as long as those KPIs stay within range of what we expect, it'll roll out to 100% production automatically based on the experiments. If the experiment fails and we're like, you know, number C is bad, it'll basically stop the rollout of C and then continue with just A and B, and then eventually you'll get down to one answer, which is the one that best solved the kind of goal of the scorecard. So setting up these goals and scorecards, like I said, we have a pretty advanced system inside of Microsoft, but there's, you know, lots of tools out there that help you do experiments and help you test things like that and kind of launch things in a phased way. But the important piece is not just testing for some high-level metric, but actually understanding what are your key metrics, what is the retention, what are the things that you really that are most important to your app. You know, if your app is selling something, you know, is it impacting users buying things, right, in a good or bad way? And if so, you know, how do you make that decision to stop the rollout or pause it?
Mm-hmm. We now have another question for you, actually. So, yeah, when you're, let's say we've now released the feature to production, and you really need to monitor like user feedback as well, right? Like the question comes from App Store reviews. So how Microsoft handles App Store reviews from the end users? How do you handle that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we just changed that process recently, as probably the question person knows, that you can now, as a developer, respond to app ratings, right? Which was always possible on the Android Play Store, but not possible on iOS until just recently. The latest last app update, iOS update, enabled that. And so we, you know, in the process, we would grab that data, and Testlio actually would analyze that and give us a report every month. I think we do monthly reports to look at a snapshot of support data, a snapshot of our app ratings, and a snapshot of our user voice feedback for feature voting. And so we found in support, we were getting lots of questions for features, and what we decided is say, hey, if we launch user voice and let people to just vote on those features, it gives them the satisfaction of knowing that their vote was heard, but also they can expose and see the top 10 list and start to say, oh, you know, I'm asking for something very rare, like printing in this certain layout, but then I look and say, oh, like tasks or like fingerprint support was like #1 for a long time until we added that in, you know, iOS 9. And then we can kind of help focus the development efforts of new features on the things that people want the most. And so specifically to App Store feedback, you know, we would read them. We used Testlio to basically analyze those for us and give us summaries and categories of where they fell into. But more recently, we have a small team inside of our support team that actually looks at those and responds to them, right? And so we're literally manually responding to them. And so we have a channel set up in Microsoft Teams where we go and we talk and say, hey, like, look at this support thing, what do we think? Hey, let's talk. And we reach out to folks and we ask them to file an app. And so we've had, like I said, some early success already where we've contacted them, you know, via the App Store reviews, kind of developer response process, said, hey, sorry you're having this problem, like we'd love to go dig into it. Because as everybody knows, like App Store reviews you live and die by them, you want a great rating. But you know, without being able to talk to the user, you can't help them in many cases, right? And so now we do have that ability, and so we basically report to them and say, hey, we would love for you to come contact us in app support. We give them like a keyword or something so that we can flag, you know, quickly, you know, kind of prioritize their issue. They go in, they reproduce the problem or contact us, and we've had some early wins already where people have come back and we've diagnosed the problem and either figured out what the bug was and fixed it, or in their particular case, worked around it or showed them like, oh, that is possible. It just, you know, the UI wasn't ideal and you couldn't find it, or, you know, and we'll take that and fix it, but here's how you do it. And then they went back and actually changed the review. So we've seen several reviews change from like a 1-star review to a 5-star review, and it's usually that binary, right? Like the ones that are the worst or the most critical, when you help them, they're also they're the biggest fans. And so we've turned a lot of people like that. And so it's just a recent thing we've started less than a month ago, actually. And so far, like, we're seeing a lot of success around that. And so we're going to continue to work on that. But again, at the scale that we're at, it's a lot of work to go through all those, because we do get lots of reviews across the apps.
Very cool. Yeah, I think that's the future as well. Like, your users should drive a lot of the features and issues that you're fixing as well, right? Like, that really helps you prioritize. So we actually had a poll as well in the middle of our conversation, Kevin, and I'm just seeing the results that the question was, what drives test strategy and planning? And first was 37% was use cases, and second was with 34% was product updates, and third was 25% user feedback. Interesting.
Yeah, interesting. So that's a good one. I think the product updates and use cases make sense. I think when I hear use cases, I think of like a spreadsheet listing of all the use cases, and to me, that's a little bit of an outdated way to look at it. Again, like, the question's the question, so it depends on how people think about it and answering. But like, I would detail that. I would double click into the use cases and say, like, are those use cases based on telemetry from the data, knowing that this is exactly what users, and depending on what telemetry system, you should be able to see, like, what are the 5 most common click streams or tap streams in an app, and then that should be the use cases that you're testing, not like, you're not your user in most cases, and the product manager or the engineering team may list out what they think the common use cases are, but as we've found out over and over again, we're wrong, right? And so being able to use telemetry to drive what we would call like the production use cases or the common use cases from production data, that to us has been the most insightful. And then I think similar on product updates, like, we all want, to build the new greatest feature and add, make a change to the product, but we need to know that for sure and use data to prove that we're right? And so it's one thing to test and validate that, but it's also important to have telemetry that as you roll out this new product update, whether it's a version-to-version change or you're rolling it out in a more flighted model like we do, that you have telemetry to compare and say, did this make the product better, right? Like, the beauty of moving quickly and every week releasing something, you need to have systems in place to understand that you're making the product better. Like, what are the KPIs that define better? Like, what is, between the leadership team, you need to understand what better is. Hey, we're trying to improve retention. We're trying to improve number of actions taken, number of things bought in a store, number of people that watch videos. If you're, depending on what the goal of the app is, like, what are those key metrics? And is each product update or each change making it better? I think people will be surprised, and we were when we first started tracking this, of how many times we were wrong. Like, what we assumed would be the change was not actually the change, and so that it was super insightful. So having telemetry around that, and then I think user feedback is just, it's the way of doing business, right? If you don't have a strong way to get direct user feedback from your users, you're just not going to have that signal. And then as you scale, you need a way to process that. And so I think, again, we use a set of tools, but then also, Testlio does kind of a more objective or subjective, kind of view across those data to give us a monthly report that helps us pick out some of the bigger trends and make sure that we're focused on the right things.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And now I would like actually considering the poll results and focusing on use cases, product updates, and user feedback. You talked a lot about your team and the culture as well. Like, how do you really make your team care about your users as well? And the question is regarding QA training. So with DevOps, the lines between development and tester have become very blurry. So how, as a QA manager, should I now structure and train my team?
Yeah, it's good. I always like to think about it as like and when we hire support people, we almost don't train them, which sounds crazy, right? Like, we really want, I don't get the chance to train my users. Like, I don't get to go to my users and out the App Store and say, hey, all the people in Japan, I'm going to train them how to use email and how to use my app. And so, part of the training is really untraining the model that you want to train people to do work, like to train it to do a certain way. You really want to turn the model to be incredibly customer focused. And this notion of like having user feedback come directly to engineering, like, I would make them go work the support. The way I would train my QA team, if I had a dedicated QA team, I would cancel their QA titles and put them all on this line of support and say, go talk to users. And very quickly they would know the pain of the users because they're sitting there taking support requests, right, for this. And so I said, if you have a QA org, you probably have a support org or a team, and so go have them sit and do pair programming, or go switch chairs with the support team for a week, and have the support team come test the app, and have the QA team go do support, because we've merged all that into one function, and so the team, that culture is inverted. But if I was running a team where there was still a kind of a traditional structure, like, I would just invert them, because there's no better way to learn how to test the app or to find gaps in your testing than to sit there and take all the support requests of what's wrong, right? And like I said, in our case, we don't have QA or engineering. It's all really merged into one. And like, our engineers sit on the support queue and they take tickets, as they're working on they all have logins to the support system to take tickets and look at that data and look at telemetry, because it's just the process that we've built. And there's nothing more gratifying when you see somebody saying, wow, you launched this feature and I love it, but equally, like, the negative feedback around, like, you launched this feature and I hate it, and or I don't understand it, or why did you break what I was doing, right? Like, users don't like change. And so just providing that direct user feedback, there's just that's the game we're in, right? Like, and nobody wants to build things that users hate. Like, we all want to build things that are great. And so, like, providing that direct conduit. And so, like, back when we were doing kind of traditional enterprise software, we always talked about, like, the ride along, right? Like, engineers would go with the salesperson to fly to some company and sit there and listen to the business person ask questions or beat them up, and like, how, this is what I need, and why don't you have this feature, and this is why I need it, this is so important to my business. Where in engineering, you can kind of use to be able to separate yourself from that. So I think in today's world where we're shipping weekly and the velocity is so fast, we don't have time to train people, right? And I look at some of the teams inside of Microsoft that are the traditional model. Like, we used to have these big kickoffs, like you would do, and again, I've heard this, like, and some teams still operate this model because they're a little, it's a little tougher to change. But if you have a 3-year development cycle, you would get there, you're like, oh, well, on year 2, we start like spending a year training the support staff and the sales staff on what the new product is and how it works. And like, we release every week, like, our changes every week. Like, you have to just be super comfortable with change and be able to read release notes, assume them, understand what's going on, how are the users going to use this, and again, using data to drive that, rather than thinking of, like, the time spent to build a training model, like, it'd already be outdated before you'd finish it. If you took 2 weeks, you'd be like 2 weeks behind. If you took a month or 2 months to build a training module or run people through training, like, our kind of traditional support staff have like a 6-week training. Like, on like 6 weeks, they're already 6-week releases behind. Like, they've lost. Like, and so that agility of moving to every week also helps kind of correct or right size the training modules and things. It's like, well, you can do whatever you want with training as long as it's done in an hour on Monday. That's it. Because it's like, if it's more than a few hours, like, you're burning up the week, and you're already on the next version. So you need to, like, pick up changes, be able to release notes. But then that becomes on requirements on dev, right? Because, like, our support agents need that data. So dev has to, in engineering, when they make changes and features, that's why we have, like, what changed, what bugs do we fix, what features did we add, developer notes, right? Every week, it's like, that is religion, right? Like, that's part of the train. Like, you can't get on the train. That's your ticket to get on the train, right? Like, the train's running every week. You got to have that data, because all the other people that are consuming that, whether it's Testlio doing their testing, we haven't venture testers. They're in various places of the world, just like our team is distributed. And so we need to have that currency to transfer that data back to your team. And similar, like, we would give it to our support team, or if our marketing team wants to go write a blog post, it's like, great, whatever you can do, you have a week to bust it out, because, like, that's the model, right? We're running. And now with bigger features, we roll them out slower, but, like, we don't try to special case them, right? Like, we say, hey, it's out and it's in there, and it's whether you're in the flight or out of the flight, but once you get in the flight, you've got the data, and you need to go with it. So it's a great question.
Yeah. So you mentioned that like, part of, like, the QA team, and I think team in general, like, we're talking about designers, engineers, product managers, like, everyone has to breathe the vision for the product, and they really need to understand how to use it. And you mentioned that nobody wants to release stuff that people don't like, but sometimes there are cases in a lot of, like, bigger companies that push out, like, a big, huge feature or release with a new design or something, and everybody hates it. Like, how do you, like, and sometimes people don't know what they want. Like, how do you make a difference?
Yeah, like, that's why we have multiple rings. That's why we try not to do big, huge things. Like, it's like, you can do the big, huge thing as long as it's done in a week and part of that process, right? Like, and so, and we make mistakes. We're human, right? We're not
Yeah.
perfect, and we, released builds or made changes where, hundreds of thousands of people are, complaining or something's wrong, and two things we optimize on. One is fix it quickly, right? Be able to roll forward and make it better very quickly, right? So if you make a mistake on Monday, like, you got to fix it on Tuesday or sometimes on Monday. Like, and you have to have a process and a build where you can make a change, ship it through, you're comfortable with the data and the testing, and it goes right through. Like, we've sent, Testlio builds where we change something on a Tuesday and say, hey, tonight test this thing, and because Wednesday we're going to release it. Like, we're releasing it regardless. We have to go. We just want to know if there's something we can tweak or change. Did we break something and make a stupid mistake that we're going to get fired, right? Like, we don't want to make, I don't want to ship an app where Compose doesn't work. Like, the fundamental promise of what the app is, like, you don't want to, you need to have a way to ensure that. And so, yeah, I think that, so have testing groups, have rings, figure out ways to get early feedback. And you don't, no surprises, right? It's like, you never want to surprise your boss. You never want to surprise your team. Like, you don't want to surprise your users, right? Like, hey, things are changing. This is why we changed it. Here's the taste state. We had a beta group, get in it. Customers that are the most vocal, we bring them closer to us. We don't push them away, right? If the customer's like, I can't believe you did this or did that, great. I'm sorry, come closer. Like, you can be in the earlier ring, like, come be in the beta, like, give us more feedback. We want that feedback because the most vocal users, the most vocal customers, those are the best partners in what you're doing, right? They're vetted. They're, I always think of like the coach when I was playing sports, like, once the coach started to stop yelling at you, he gave up. Like, they're like, oh, they're not, I'm in football practice and I'm kind of lagging behind and they're not yelling. They're like, oh yeah, he's not yelling at me because I'm not playing on Friday. Like, very simple. Like, they're like, oh, you're gonna be slow and slack? No problem. And so I think of that same way. When your customers stop complaining, they are not using your app. Like, and they stop giving you, like, the reason they're giving you feedback is because they care. They really, really want the app to work. They're not giving you feedback because they hate you. They may see that what you read, but you have to invert that and say, they're giving you feedback. Those are gifts, like that feedback or that support request, or those are all gifts. They're giving you their time and they're giving you back that data that you can go use to improve. And so if you have to take that feedback and receive it as a gift and thank them for it and not be like, oh, dude, another guy complained that our app is slow and doesn't have this feature. That's the stupidest feature ever. But you're not your user, right? And so thank them for that. How do you figure out, like, hey, would this work for you? Can you come into our beta? We'd love that feedback. Thank you so much for being so critical of us. Please, continue that. And as you build that, you build fans, right? You build people that are like invested in you being successful, being better and improving.
Yeah, I really like the one that you said, feedback is gift, and I totally agree with that as well. It's crucial for building products, and even when we came out with Testlio, we really needed that feedback from our potential customers who would be using the product as well, right? So it really is a gift. And as we're getting closer to 11 a.m. here Pacific time, I would like to ask my last question, and we might have a poll as well coming up. The question is, how do you measure quality? I think there are companies out there that think about quality in terms of how many issues do we have in the backlog, what's our app store rating. There are multiple things. How do you do that?
Yeah, so we're on multiple things, right? So we have like an NPS score, so kind of the traditional like 0 to 11, 1 to 5, depend on the scale you're using. But we look at that for like hey, how happy are people with the app from kind of day 0 to day 7? We obviously look at App Store ratings, and that's probably the one that I lose the most sleep over, because it's at the App R scale with the diversity of the features and the diversity of the content and the diversity of the user base, like, it's incredibly hard. But the goal, like we always talked about this, right? 5-star app, released every 7 days, on both platforms simultaneously. That was our like kind of mantra at Acompli, right? Like, the goal, we know what the goal is. The North Star is 5 stars. And we got there a few times with Acompli, but the shoes that we were filling as a cool kid startup in Silicon Valley was very different from, naming yourself Outlook and walking in the shoes of giants. That's, a 3-decade-old application with expectations that are, well regarded, right? Like, there's a massive number of features and a massive number of expectations. You're like, well, you're Microsoft. You should be perfect. You should never release a bug, and you should find everything. But we're human, right? And so we've tried to make that culture as inclusive and as open, and allow the diversity of users to kind of, expand upon that. And so, so we look at App Store ratings. We look at, the really hardcore numbers around quality, around crash-free sessions, like, how often, and so, how many nines are you going for, right? You talk about like 3 or 5 nines and like the, or, whatever your number is in the DevOps world. You similarly want that in crash-free sessions, right? How can you get 3 to 5 nines in crash-free sessions for your users? And then what are the cases? What are the devices? How do you drill down on that and learn from that? We look at telemetry. We look at retention. Retention's probably, if you had to pick one thing, and specifically in mobile apps, like there's nothing more important to focus on than retention, right? Like retention will make everything else, like great retention makes everything else kind of easy, right? Like if you go in, if you're acquiring users through organic or you're buying them or whatever, if you have great retention, like they're staying with you, which means they like it. And then, as you get more users, that's in a very efficient funnel. If your retention's terrible and you're losing, 90% of your users or 80% of your users, you're like, well, every time I go and buy 10 users, I'm only really getting 2. So now my costs are higher, or whether it's an organic buy or, in the sense that you're doing, brand marketing or it's just organic because they're coming in. If you're losing them, you're going to have a hard time growing, right? If you're not able to retain your users. And so I think if I had to pick one thing, it'd be retention. Then, so we look at that very closely. And I think the other, one is the App Store ratings, because that's kind of your scoreboard, right? Like the old days of enterprise software, there's no public scoreboard. People's like, oh, this sucks, or this is great, I don't know, like there's no good data. But like in the app world, like the scoreboard is very public, and there's nothing worse than waking up and seeing your app ratings are down, and you're like, now we got to fix this and get on it. And so we look at that often, and it's, it keeps us employed, but it's also like one of the things we work on really, really hard is trying to figure out how to constantly improve and close that gap and build processes to make it better so that we prevent mistakes or prevent regressions and things that we know will impact our app score.
Yeah, thanks. And the last question, we have a couple of minutes left. How do you see the future of testing? What role manual testers will play in the future? What do you think? Because I think a lot of testers, there was even a question in our coming from the audience that some people might be concerned about their role as a manual tester. Like, what do you think? What's the future of testing?
Yeah, I think like I said, I mentioned a little earlier, like the manual tester of like the past, of the one where they get a list of Excel, test cases, or they're in some test case software checking off like did X, did Y, like that tester is not going to last very long. I just don't think there's a lot of ROI and value in that. It's not efficient. It doesn't handle the diversity. So I think the kind of manual tester that's going to be rewarded or seen kind of future is that a manual tester that's not just a tester, right? They go in and they look at the App Store reviews, like, oh, I'm testing this app. Like, what are the App Store reviews? What are people complaining about? Like, we love it when folks on the team go in and look at 1-star reviews and saying, yeah, I found like 5 1-star reviews on this particular area, and like I found a test that'll produce it, and sure enough, like that feature is missing, or that thing doesn't work on the case that's saying that's correct. Let's go fix it. So I think the manual tester is being able to make. I always think of it as Facebook has this model of like the engineer rewards are really tied to developer efficiency. And so I talked to my team. It's like if you can find a way to reduce the time to build something in half, like if our build time is 5 minutes and you can reduce it to 2 minutes, you literally can take the whole month off, because by just saving the team, like the number of developers on our team, the number of builds that we do every day, like if you can reduce that by half, you've made everybody more efficient, your job is done. And so making engineers more efficient and making the product team more efficient, like there's no bigger reward from an individual case. And so if you think of a manual tester, if you can go and distill data from like a very wide source like the app reviews or support tickets. That's why I said if you're you want to go sit at the support, go sit in the support queue for a while and handle support tickets for a couple of days, and I guarantee you'll come up with better bugs than running that same test script that you've been running for years, right? Like that will give you great insightful data, and you can come back to the engineering team and say, look, here's what I found. Like if I was a QA person and had a QA role in a traditional job, I would go and work all my extra hours sitting in support or looking at app reviews and come into work, and I'd do my checklist if that was my boss's job, but I would really detail and dig on and say, oh, here's these great issues. I found this thing that was missing, or I found this common bug, and this is going to impact our star ratings because 10% of our 1-star reviews are this, or 12% of our tickets are around this issue. If we just made this one change to onboarding, or the way login worked, or the way we handled errors, like that would make us more efficient. Like it's very hard for machines to do that, to understand like from a specific app, where is the feedback coming? Oh, maybe it's on Twitter. Go do a search on Twitter for your app and get a bunch of feedback where people are complaining, or go look on Facebook group or whatever, like wherever or if you have forums, like whatever it is, there's people will find a way to complain in today's world or give you feedback, again, gifts, right? And so go collect those gifts, organize them, come back and say, hey, here's 3 things that are super impactful that'll improve the product. Like, that's manual work, but the leverage that you have when you take that kind of data and distill it down to something that's super actionable, like, I don't know, if I was like managing a team of QA engineers and there's an engineer or a QA person coming back and saying, bam, I'm busting out these bugs that are not bugs, they're like, this is that, and I have all this data to prove that like 10% of our users are seeing this, like that's way more important than like, oh, line 72 on, you know, pivot table B failed the test for the 7th time, and I've told you guys to go fix this. Like, that's valuable-ish, but probably not. Like, people aren't using that feature that much, or like, you know, like, go find the things that they care about. Go dig into the telemetry, become a data geek, right? And so I think there's clearly room for smart people that are product-tied to go do that. The question is, how do you direct that manual energy, if you want to call it that, into like the most value that you can drive for the team or the product?
Yeah, seriously, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the more time goes by, there are going to be more blurred lines between different roles in the companies. But by the end of the day, quality is team's work, and I think it's for everyone. It's really important to understand like how your users think and what makes them happy, what doesn't make them happy, and really have the data to prove it as well. Like how are we going to prioritize the changes in the app as well? So we are now out of time. Unfortunately, I would like to chat with you forever, Kevin. So, but thank you so much for taking the time again today. So, and I also wanted to mention that we got a lot of questions, and we will definitely follow up with these. And if we didn't get to your question, so we'll probably send an email afterwards after that webinar.
Yeah, just send me an email or reach me on Twitter or something, and I will get back to you guys, and we can send it on. So,
thanks a lot, and yeah, we'll make follow up as well. So thank you everyone for coming, and thanks Kevin a lot for this awesome chat. And yeah,
no problem. Glad I can help. Take care. Bye.
Bye.